Well, good morning and welcome to each to our final meeting of 2024. And just start off with some warden's remarks. On December the 6th, we had the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. And it's a day dedicated to remembering those who have experienced gender-based violence and those who we have lost to it. And a vigil was scheduled to take place at the Courthouse in Goderich. And I was asked to bring some closing remarks, but because of inclement weather, that got shuffled around a bit, and there was still an observation that took place, but it was done in an online format, so it was good to at least be able to continue to do that and to remember that, and we'll look forward to next year's ceremony. On December the 7th, I attended the Huron County 4-H Annual Awards Night and had the pleasure of presenting Seth Moffat with the Huron County Warden's Award. Seth was recognized as the top novice. He had the highest score, and he was part of the Brussels Beef Club and Morris Turnberry resident. So a very good honor to start off handing that award out to Seth. And just want to take this opportunity as our last meeting of the year to wish each and every one of you a Merry Christmas and hope that you take the opportunity to enjoy the blessings of the season with your family and loved ones. And as always, I remind people that we are blessed with so much, and whenever possible, take the opportunity to share some of those blessings with those that are less fortunate in our local communities. So with that, I would like to move on to the approval of the agenda. Councillor Basnett and Councillor Anderson would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. Is there any pecuniary interest to disclose at this time? Councillor Klopp.
Yes, our in-camera, and I apologize to Susan, must be the Christmas spirit got me. It's with the in-camera with regard to the roundabout, as I'm
okay.
Family interest in renting of one of the properties that may be involved.
So our clerk will get you the form to fill out for that. I can move on. So the minutes of our previous meeting, December the 4th, is there any errors or omissions to address? And if not, then I'd be looking for a motion. Councillor Vanstone and Councillor Alvin McClellan would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. And we do have a delegation this morning. It's from the Social Research and Planning Council, United Way, Perth Huron. And we have a presentation by Kirsten Crane. And Kirsten, welcome, and when you're ready.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Kristen Crane with United Way, Perth Huron. I'm the Director of Research and Social Planning. And also here with me today is, I can let Beth introduce herself too, but Beth Blows, who is the co-chair of the Social Research and Planning Council as well. Thank you for having us, Warden, Council, and staff. Sir, advance, please.
I just wanted to share a quick note with you before we begin. I have been a member of the Social Research and Planning Council for the past 6 years. 4 of those years have been as the co-chair and chair. I just wanted to let you know that both personally and professionally, our days are full of decisions. You know, some of them as mundane as, you know, what are we going to have for lunch? Others more important, such as the decisions you make around this table. And I think for all of us to make the best decisions possible, we really need to take into consideration facts, evidence, information, so that we are making good decisions, regardless of how important they are. And I think the research that Social Research and Planning Council does is vitally important to help us in that decision making. Okay, next slide. Oh, you're already there. Sorry, if you could go back one. My apologies. Okay. You can all read this, so I won't take the time to read it for you. I did want to reference the fact, though, that the SRPC does work in partnership with different levels of government, the nonprofit sector, the business sector, and volunteers. So we have worked obviously with many of you as well in various capacities. So if we look at the functions, which are on the next slide of the SRPC, we do a lot more than just research. We do spend time strengthening and developing partnerships We participate in many planning tables and bring data and understanding to those tables. Tables such as the Community Safety and Wellbeing Table in Huron County that I know you're all familiar with, the Homelessness Table, mental health, racism, family violence, all kinds of tables Kristen and her colleagues sit around. We'll speak Kristen's going to share with you a couple of our current research projects, so I'll leave that for a moment. We also strive to support the nonprofit sector throughout Huron and Perth counties. We have numerous workshops that folks are able to participate in, such as how to write grants. We've held a number of workshops on new legislation, conflict management. During COVID, there was several information sessions related to grants and funding that were available through federal, provincial government, etc. Advocacy work that we do is with, again, many levels of government and on behalf of the community. And that is, again, where the research that we conduct comes into play. So it provides us with the details and the information that we can share with the community. Community-based responses, again, is us responding and working with others in the community on issues and topics of concern to local residents or of concern to citizens at large, other nonprofit organizations. Our tax filing clinics are one example of that. And again, Kristen is going to share some information with you about the tax clinics.
Next, please. Okay. So our current research project we're undertaking with a great research team from the University of Guelph, and we're looking at experiences of the 2S LGBTQ+ community in Huron and Perth. And we're paying specific attention to community integration and experiences of discrimination. This research, we're starting to get in the preliminary results of the first phase right now, will be used by service providers, particularly those in healthcare and the education sector, to determine where to place their resources and how to develop programming and services to meet the needs of the population. We are really grateful to be working very closely with, in addition to University of Guelph, we have the Avon-Maitland District School Board at both the trustees and senior staff level, Children's Aid Society, Huron Perth Public Health, Huron County Pride, Cultural Services, just to name a few of our partners in Huron County. We see that there's a lot of strong interest in this research because there is a complete lack of information from the population itself as to what they need to be integrated and also feel safe and welcomed in our community. Next. So our survey was just nearing close as this presentation was prepared. So this is not the final results, but just what we had that's preliminary data. We saw that 71% of our survey respondents had already indicated that specialized care such as primary health, counseling, and peer support groups were lacking in the community. And we also surveyed service providers. They were asked about the barriers to delivering services, specifically to the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And the main reason that was cited was lack of information about the needs of the community. So we already see just from this very preliminary research that this project will have a big impact. And just in the results, we had a great turnout across different age groups. Very pleased to see that 1 in 4 was under the age of 25 years. Next. Switching gears to some of the work that we're doing directly in the community, we are working on part of a regional poverty reduction strategy that has been developed in partnership with Huron Perth Public Health, Huron County Social Services, and the Social Research and Planning Council. And we have taken on the role of tax filing coordination and expansion in our region. This was at the request of community partners, and we have been able to help. And previously, Huron County Library had taken on some financial administration for the clinics, but Social Research and Planning Council has taken that on. Tax filing, we know, is the most effective proven strategy that we know of to increase the financial security of lower income households. Through the tax clinics, we mobilize volunteers to help people with low, modest incomes to boost their incomes through tax filing. Next, please. So in 2023, well, the 2023 tax year, but we saw enormous interest in the clinics, and we know that there's potential for so much more. Over 900 tax returns were filed by volunteers, and that resulted in over $1.8 million in benefits and credits going to lower income households. Based upon the data that we have of incomes and households in Huron and Perth, we know that approximately 10% of households are living with low incomes that would be eligible to file taxes. We also know that nationally, approximately 10% of households are not filing taxes. So there's really huge potential to grow this and expand it, and we're excited to take on that role. It's huge return on investment. It employs a 0.2 FTE staff person at United Way to support the tax clinics and expand them, do volunteer administration, all the pieces related to that. Next. And there's other ways to get involved. I'd really encourage you to share this within your communities, with your constituents, friends, family, neighbors. We need more volunteers to serve our communities. We have a strong turnout throughout the county, but of course the need does outpace what we're able to deliver. So if training is provided, no skills beyond financial literacy are needed. We would love to speak with you further if you know of anyone who would like to volunteer, or if you can spread the words yourselves. Next, please.
Okay. So our invitation to you in 2025 is twofold. One is to assist us in supporting equity efforts related to the research that Kristen referred to earlier. We will be working with community groups and to action the recommendations coming out of the 2S LGBTQ+ survey, whether this means identifying new services that are needed or assisting some of our community partners in modifying their services so that they're more responsive to the needs of our community residents. Kristen has also referenced, obviously, 2 or 3 ways that you can assist as well in terms of the tax filing clinics. Absolutely critical. When you look at those numbers in a small rural community like Huron County, you know, over $1 million coming to residents and coming to their spending power and ability to participate in the community. The next slide, please. So we're here today to respectfully ask your consideration of funding for 2025 to enable us to continue the work of those 2 projects. I mentioned some of the communities or some of the organizations and planning tables that we do sit around so that we are contributing to the community in a variety of ways. We've had the pleasure the last number of years of having Mayor McNeil and Barbara Hall sitting on our committee, and we very much respect and appreciate the input they've been able to share with us. So that is our request, I guess, for you today, and we thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. And if you do have any questions, you're more than welcome and encouraged to reach out to Kristen. Her contact information is on the screen. So I guess that's it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to council. Is there any comments or questions you have at this time regarding the presentation? Seeing none, then I would be looking for a motion to receive the presentation for information at this time. Councillor Finch, second by Past Warden McNeil. Those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
Going to move on to councillor comments. Is there any councillor comments this morning?
No.
Okay.
This is what we're going to be doing now.
So we do have a consent agenda. There's 5 items on that. Is there anything specific that anybody wants to pull out and address? And if not, then I'd be looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councillor Basnet and Councillor Dietrich, those in favor? And that is carried. Is Cheryl virtual? So we're moving on to social and property services, and there's a childcare growth in North Huron presentation by Cheryl Patience. And Cheryl is going to be joining us virtually. There you are, Cheryl. So welcome, Cheryl, and just go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Warden Heffer, and good morning to you and to members of council. I apologize, I'm a little under the weather, so bear with my voice. In 2023, the Ministry of Education provided Huron County with a growth target of 175 new licensed childcare spaces for ages 0 to 5 between the years of 2022 and 2026. Along with this request came annual startup funding to support the growth and to accommodate the pressures that the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system had put on our existing childcare spaces. North Huron Children's Services is looking to expand in Blythe and has applied for a startup grant. They are in good standing as a licensee with us, and this growth is in line with our targeted growth plan. It is a developing area that's underserved, and it requires parents to travel for childcare needs. It's also part of our 5-year plan to increase childcare availability for Huron County residents. North Huron is looking to create 26 childcare spaces to open September 2025. And through our 100% provincial startup funding, which is to assist childcare providers in creating new childcare spaces in line with our targeted growth strategies, we would like to recommend that we support them with a $350,000 grant for this project. And I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have about this.
Thank you, Cheryl. Over to council. Is there any questions? Councillor McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Really happy that they're expanding it. There is a need for the service, absolutely. It's great that the government is helping with the startup costs. How does it work going forward with the reduction in what parents have to pay now? Because there's a little bit of a discrepancy between what the providers get and what the parents have to pay with that working towards the $10 a day kind of daycare thing. How does that work out when you start new spots? Because the math is pretty straightforward with what the true costs are at that point. There's no fudging of the numbers. Do they work them different, or does it just work on based on what you already had for spaces?
Cheryl, could you address that?
Sure, through you, Warden. I hope I'm understanding the question correctly, but we received funding based on our number of occupied spaces. So in 2025, the Ministry of Education is looking at a cost-based funding formula. So they are looking at how many licensed occupied spaces that we have in the system. And they're looking at the parent contribution, which has been leveled to $22 across the province effective January 1st. And then the additional cost to provide the care to the provider is offset through the money that we would flow to them through a grant each month. So that system should offset, and we should receive enough funding to support the additional growth within the county. And if I'm not answering that correctly, please let me know.
Nope, that satisfied the asker. Thank you, Cheryl. Any other questions? Councillor Anderson.
Thanks for the information. As Councillor McClellan said, it is nice to see the increase in spaces. But I know recently in Central Huron, there used to be a before and after school program at one of the schools, and that was discontinued. And those parents are really having a difficult time in order to find childcare spaces. So how do we go about trying to help the other communities within Huron County that don't have the before and after school or childcare services within them?
Cheryl.
Through you, Warden. Unfortunately, before and after school is a bit of a tricky one because it falls under the regulations as a responsibility of the school board. So it's not necessarily a CMSM role. So our mandate is more, or it is the younger children. Once it becomes a school age program, it's not within our mandate any longer. We do encourage before and after school. We do assist where we can with that. But the funding, the way the ministry rolls it out, is only for the 0 to 6, which catches very few of those before and after school children. So it's creating those programs and looking for the viability and the need is actually something that the school board does. So we work alongside them, but they would have an agreement with the provider, not Huron County as the CMSM.
Go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Okay, thank you for that answer. But how do we get more childcare spaces within all Huron County? Because I've had a number of parents that have approached me about this because they thought they had a childcare space for their upcoming child, and all of a sudden they are told that they no longer have a space. They can have one child within the childcare, but they can't have their other child because there is a lack of spaces throughout different areas within the county. And this is for babies as well.
Cheryl?
Sure, and through you, Warden. It's definitely a need. It's something that we're working towards. I think all of our providers were encouraging to apply for any startup grants available. We are looking at our underserved areas because there's demand everywhere, and it's actually countrywide now that this Canada-wide system has been put in place. More people are looking at licensed childcare versus other options. So there's definitely a demand, which is why the ministry is putting these startup grants into place. We are encouraging all of the areas, and through the 5-year plan that's kind of targeted where shortcomings are within the county, we're working with those populations and are those providers in those areas in particular. There's lots of work to do, I will say, and our goal is to just keep encouraging people and keep trying to grow. A lot of it does come down to staffing. So we need the people to work in the childcare centers, which is always, as many of you know, troublesome to get the staff. So as our communities are growing, we're hoping that that brings more staff, but it also brings more demand on the childcare system.
Okay, Councillor McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the CAO from Avon-Maitland School Board. And one of the things the province had been pushing them for a while is to try and find reciprocal programs between themselves and municipalities. So I brought in our director of recreation. And one of the things that we talked about, and she also takes care of our oversees our daycare center. But one of the things we talked about was starting up a before and after school program right in the schools. The school board loves that idea because parents going to work can drop the kids off whatever time, as long as it's open at that point. And when school starts, they just get to walk to their classroom. After class, they get to walk back. We get the space for free. We just let them use our recreation centers at some point throughout the year, whether it's ice skating for the kids or whatever. So it's just a trade-off. It's a great idea. Again, I agree with what Cheryl said. Staffing is going to be probably the biggest problem. But when you consider the fact that you've got a spot that you can get to help these parents out, and the spot isn't costing you anything, and most of the time when the kids want to use the recreation centers, it's during the day when they're not being used anyways. So again, you're getting better use out of your facilities. So each municipality could take a serious look at that, because that could be a great program that helps out right across the county.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Cheryl? So Cheryl, thank you for the presentation, and I'm going to now go to see what council's wish is. There is a prepared motion in our package. If somebody's satisfied with that, I'd go for motion. Pass Warden McNeil and Pass Warden McClellan. Those in favor? And that is carried. And Cheryl, you're available for the Early On Child and Family Center space in South Huron for questions. Is there any questions for Cheryl on this report? See none, then I'd be looking for a mover and a seconder to receive the report and approve entering into the lease with the Exeter Lions. Councillor Ginn and Councillor Finch would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, Cheryl. So Barbara is here to answer any questions on the residential tenancy agreement and residential tenancy amending agreement with Huron Perth Children's Aid Society. So is there any questions for Cheryl on this report? Councillor McClellan.
Apologize for that. Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to Barb, I noticed there, I think it was on about page 94, you talk about pets for the people renting, and it talks about 2 pets. I just wondered, that seems extreme, so it does, but is that a right at that point? Cute.
Barbara?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Warden Heffer. We typically follow the lower tiers bylaws for pet policies. So we don't restrict pets. We follow the lower tiers, our partner municipalities' bylaws for pets.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And if I could have a follow-up, please, Mr. Warden. Also, too, I noticed in there you mentioned posting about smoking, no smoking, and things like that. But I found, didn't say anything about drug usage or anything like that. Is that something you would normally post or not? Thank you.
Go ahead, Barbara.
And again, through you, Warden Heffer. Addressing the smoking piece, we've had smoke-free buildings, I think, since 2016. New buildings are completely smoke-free. Our social housing buildings, tenants who lived there prior to 2016 were grandfathered in. Anyone moving in after 2016 is smoke-free. In terms of marijuana use, we use that if it's for cultural reasons and that they're able to provide verification, or if it's for medical reasons. In terms of drug use, that's an illegal act, and that's we don't necessarily post for all illegal acts. We know that drug use is illegal, and we would pursue any evidence of that. It's a standard process that there's just no tolerance for that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Barbara? So then I'd be looking for a motion then to receive the report and authorize a bylaw be drafted. Councillor Heffer and Councillor Finch would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. And there's a report for under Homes for the Aged from Dana Meller, and she's here to answer questions that would arise from that report. Is there any questions from council on that? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Warden. It's nice to see that we're going to get the extra funding, but I'm just wondering, because we do have staffing issues now, is this going to imply that we're going to have more staffing issues in order to get the qualified staff to do some of these extra things that we're going to do?
Dana?
Through you, Warden. So the funding is specific. So it is more to help with the reduction in ED visits, like the emergency room visits. So it's specific to equipment such as bariatric equipment. And then IV therapy as well. So it won't, it will be with the existing staff that we already have.
Okay. Follow up.
Thank you, Warden. It's just that when I read this, it said it was for covering the cost of specialized staffing as well as equipment and services.
Dana?
Through you. So the funding is, we would apply for the specific funding. It was for various options. So what we chose to apply for was the IV therapy. So you could apply for wound therapy as well, which we have a wound specialist. Like we train some of our staff to do that. We did apply for things that we would be able to effectively implement with the existing staff that we already have, knowing that the funding wouldn't be effective if we couldn't provide extra staffing to do that. So it is for IV therapy, so it would be for the equipment and the training of the staff that we already have, so that we would be able to take residents back from hospital sooner and empty the emergency rooms, etc. And then as well to accommodate, the other was for the bariatric equipment. And we did get funding for Huron Lee for mattresses for wound care, so that way we could offload some of the pressure points for some of those residents that come back from hospital that do have some wounds, such as those kinds of things. So it is working within the existing staff that we have, knowing that we do have a staffing concern throughout the province. So that's what we applied for.
Okay. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you.
All right. Councillor McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I guess it's as much a comment as a request. I hear from members of the public that certainly seem to think they know what it's costing to have, and I don't know whether the term is contract labor or agency assisted personnel at the homes, but the public or certain members of the public certainly seem to think it's an outrageous amount that we're paying for that service. Could we get a report back on how many people, and I did read in the report here that we've had some success hiring new people, and you've got some other programs underway and trying to get our own staff on board, which is great. But could we get a report of how many agency people we have and what the upcharge is costing the county to have those over and above employees that we would employ ourselves? Thank you.
So Dana, is that something that staff would be prepared for?
Yes, and we could come back with a report with those numbers for you for sure.
So that sounded like a motion to me, Past Warden McClellan.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Anderson? Those in favor? And that is carried. Any other questions for Dana? And if not, then there is a motion to receive the report and to draft a bylaw. Councillor Noel and Councillor Dietrich. Those in favor? And that is carried. So Dana, the next report is on the accessibility van, and you're here to answer questions for that. Is there any questions on that report? Councillor Klopp.
Thank you. I recall last year's budget, did we not have a new bus or something in for the homes for the aged? And if that's the case, please clarify, or is this a new bus?
I'll turn that to our treasurer, Michael Bloomhagen.
Through yourself, Warden. So it was listed in the budget last year. We just hadn't moved on it. So it's just a continuation of what was in the budget. Prices are continuing to go up on that van. So that's why this report is before you today. We just want to make sure that council's on board with moving forward. So you'll see it again, and we have it listed in the fleet budget as well for 2025, but it's just a same unit as before, just as a carry forward.
Follow up.
Thank you for that clarification. So this motion then puts it in for discussion for the budget, or if it's passed that it's in, then it's already going to be approved? I'm clarifying that point.
CAO Work would like to respond to that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Warden. The intention would be for the item to be put into the draft budget for discussion with County Council at that time. We just wanted to pull it out to ensure that County Council had a fulsome picture of the financial implications of it being included.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, then there is a motion in our package to receive the report and to approve or not approve the request to include the replacement homes for the 8-passenger van. Councillor Ginn? To approve?
To approve or not approve?
Yes, to approve. So motion to approve. And Councillor Finch would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, Dana. Moving on to emergency services and Huron County Paramedic Services, refreshing the master plan. And it's going to be presented by Mr. Andrew Gregan, and I'll turn it over to Jeff Horseman to introduce him for us.
Thank you and good morning. And just while Andrew gets pulled into the meeting, I just wanted to give council just a quick refresh on the background. In 2019, we had contracted deployment master plan and base review to ORH. That work was all completed in the latter half of 2019, which was presented to County Council in February of 2020. And as we all know, 3 weeks later, we were in COVID shutdown. So some of the recommendations at the time were implemented. Others were brought forward as a greater priority. Others were pushed off and put back later into the plan just because of COVID and the priorities of COVID itself. Now that we're freshly out of COVID and moving forward, we felt that it would be in our best interest to bring ORH back into the mix, refresh the plan as we're 5 years into that 10-year plan, and make sure that we were still on the same track as where we should be. So we contacted ORH again, and Andrew Gregan is a senior consultant with ORH, who was one of the consultants that worked on the plan the first time. And again, I'd like to welcome him here today to give you a new look at what's being recommended for the refresh.
And just before we welcome Andrew, I'm going to ask our CAO Work for some comments.
Megan, you're muted.
You're muted, Megan.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much both to Mr. Gregan and to Chief Horseman for their work on this. You know, as council, I just wanted to give some context for this discussion. As council is taking a look at the budget that's in front of them for 2025, there are some increases that are outlined there, and I felt that it was important, along with Chief Horseman, that council has a really good sense of why those increases are being asked for in relation to EMS. And so, again, just really appreciate the background work that ORH has done for us, and look forward to that information being shared with the rest of County Council. Thank you very much, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Megan. And Andrew, just before you start, I'm going to ask that you just do a check to make sure the audio is working.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Andrew.
So yes, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Warden. Good morning, Council. Thank you for inviting me to present to you today. Just going to take you through a bit of an overview of the work we've undertaken through these slides that are now hopefully on your screen, and I can definitely see on my screen. So there is also an accompanying draft report that I believe has been shared as well, which will give more detail than obviously is included in the relatively brief presentation today. And then we'll be working on kind of finalising that report, so taking it on board any comments, etc., through to finalising that report in the new year. Next slide, please. So today I'd just like to go through a bit of the background. I appreciate the CAO and the Chief have just taken you through a little bit of that, but a bit of the background on not only what the review is and what we've sought to do, but who we are as well. Then we'll take you through some of the key analysis and modelling outcomes before recapping on the recommendations, and then we can obviously answer any questions as necessary. Next slide, please. Next slide again, please. Thank you. So just a little bit on who we are. We're a small consultancy called ORH, based in the UK, as you can probably tell from my accent, just a little bit outside of London. And we work with emergency services across the world to optimise their resource usage and respond in the most effective and efficient way. So we work with paramedic services or ambulance services, as we term them over here, police services, and also fire services, really across the globe. Whilst there are lots of differences and each service is unique, there are clearly some similar challenges faced in lots of different areas across the areas we work in. Next slide, please. So over the last few years, specifically in Ontario, these are some of the areas we work. For yourselves, for Huron County, highlighted in green on that map there, including some of your neighbours in Bruce, Grey, Wellington and Middlesex as well. Really quite a variety across Ontario, Southern Ontario, of mixed urban and rural services, so quite a breadth of knowledge there. We also work with, I think, 10 of the 13 ambulance services here in the UK. We worked with quite a few in Australia, over in BC as well, and New Zealand, and a variety of other locations. So hopefully bringing not only knowledge from the sector in Southern Ontario, but also perhaps on a wider perspective as well. And each of these reviews that we've highlighted here in green has been within the last few years, and a similar scope to that we've been asked to do here, really creating or updating a master plan for the next 5 or 10 years for each of these services. Next slide, please. So what we were asked to do was update that deployment review that we finished in 2020. Looking forward now a further 10 years, so through to 2034. So we collected workload data, so information on patients, where they are, which vehicles responded, how long that took, and lots more supplementary information there to understand what changes have happened within the county, external and internal factors that might have changed. Also collected resourcing and shift information, both on a kind of planned basis, so what we plan to put out each day at each station, but whether there are any upstaffing or downstaffing occasions. Collected census, population, and also housing development data, which was available for this review, to look at kind of more specific developments. We had a few specific questions around the Brussels station or post to station relocation, the impact of the potential neighbouring Grand Bend move, and also around the overnight closures in Clinton Public Hospital as well. I'm not going to cover too much on those specifically today, but they are in more detail in the report as to the effect that's happened or may happen for the paramedic services. A lot of the focus of our report was really looking at, okay, this is where we are in 2024. How can we maintain or potentially improve response time performance through to 2034? How will we go about that? What's demand going to look like in the future? What do we need in terms of additional resources? Next slide, please. So generally, our approach is to collect data, like I briefly outlined there, check that we're understanding that data correctly, compare that to council reports and any reports, etc., to make sure our numbers are accurate. Make sure we can identify different sources that may help us, for example, population information. Produce some analysis to make sure that we play back some interesting insights into what's happened. And also, again, check, does this match with the everyday experience of the paramedic service? Are we seeing something that's a quirk of the data, or is this true? We also use this to build our simulation and optimization models, and I'll cover a little bit more on that later. We use those models to test out, okay, here's where we are now. How do we get to where we need to be in 2034? What different options are there, different options for change? How can we look at the different optimal solutions that may be out there? For example, if we move a station to its absolute optimal best location, what impact would that have for us? And really the reason that's the main component of our work is around that modeling component, because rather than having to run something in a trial in real life, we're able to run that in a computer replica model that allows us to test different options relatively quickly to really hone in on some sensible conclusions and recommendations. We believe that approach, along with consultation with the client and with other stakeholders throughout, should hopefully lead to better decision making and evidence for that decision making. Next slide, please. Just wanted to very briefly recap some of the recommendations that we made back in 2020. As the chief said, some of these have already been put in place. So I know the Goderich upstaff in the daytime has been introduced, but some of these have not been progressed, and clearly quite a challenge over the last few years, particularly just after that review. We presented the recommendations back then. So one of the moves, or one of the changes we identified, was to look for land for a Seaforth site, relocating the Tuckersmith station to Seaforth. Looking at an increase to Clinton resources, potential expansion of sites, either Bayfield or Zurich, with some capacity issues with stations. Looking to increase the resources in Exeter and Wingham, and then some changes around deploying to Brussels or building a Brussels base, and also looking at the rapid response unit vehicle in ACW as well. So those were the recommendations from the previous review. Clearly, we need to almost start again to make sure, which of these have already been undertaken? Do they still apply? Are they still the right thing to do? And is this still the kind of the right order? And we'll come to that at the end in our recommendations section, but useful context, I hope. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to take you through a few key slides of analysis and then some of the modelling outcomes as well, to give you an idea of some of the evidence behind some of the recommendations we've made. Like I said, there's a lot more detail in that draft report around context and background and other scenarios we've modelled and other analysis we've looked at too. Next slide, please. So the first slide here, just wanted to give an idea of back from 2019, so when we started collecting data for this review, mid-2019 through to mid-2024, each of these dots on the graphs here represents a day for Huron County Paramedic Services. And going up the axis shows how many incidents there were on that day. And that's incidents that were responded to by the paramedic service, regardless of whether they were in the county or not. Maybe they're over the border. We've also just drawn on there, and hopefully you can see some of those numbers and some of those lines. The lines represent averages for that year, and you can see, despite 2020 being a similar year to 2019, actually since then we've seen a general increase. 2024, we collected data up to the middle of the year, probably expecting it to be similar to the 2023 demand level as well. So generally an increasing demand level, around 22 or so incidents a day for Huron County Paramedic Services to undertake. Next slide, please. On average, though, for each of those incidents that we undertake, just focusing on non-hospital transfer priority or code 4 calls, so calls really from the community, generally 911 calls. For each of those calls now, on average, we're spending longer with that patient or kind of servicing that call. So you can see on the bars there, through from 2019 through to 2024, if we just focus on the very top of those bars that incorporates the different parts of the call, we're going from somewhere around 55 minutes in 2019 on average to undertake a call, to respond to an incident and to clear, be that a hospital, be that at a scene, now to actually over an hour. So a bit of an increase there, and really through and since COVID seen an increase there. The primary driver, and really the only noticeable increase in each part of the call, is around the time at hospital. So the time spent on average from the vehicle arriving at hospital through to being able to post clear. So handing over or offloading the patient and then getting ready for that next call or going back to base or ending shift. That's now around 7 minutes longer than it was back in 2019. So that doesn't represent a significant increase in time compared to some areas we've worked in. We're averaging now about 23 minutes spending at hospital. But clearly 7 minutes on what was before under 16 minutes is a relatively large proportional increase, and that's on average per incident. So each time we do that, we're spending on average 7 minutes longer. Next slide, please. We also undertook some benchmarking. So this was comparing Huron County Paramedic Services to some of those other services I showed on that green map earlier, and really focusing on those that are appropriate, the generally more rural services that is kind of fair to compare to. So we just looked at a few different parameters or a few different components and different measures to see, really, are there areas that could be improved upon? Are there things that stand out as, either a lot shorter or longer, for example, than other areas? Where are the areas of interest? One of those that did initially stand out was around mobilization time for code 4 calls, actually being the longest of any area that we benchmarked. However, this is more of a reporting issue, particularly around Tucker Smith Station, where we know radio reception is poor. It's not actually that crews are taking longer to mobilize, it's more that the time they radio to mobilize, the radio that they have mobilized, sorry, is a little bit longer than their actual time. So sometimes the data can look like, the service is an outlier and things can be improved upon, but actually it's more of a reporting challenge than some other issues. Next slide, please. That's all looking at the history really and very brief overview of what's happened in the past and analysing some historical data. But obviously, if we're thinking about 2034, we need to understand, first question is how many patients do we think we'll be serving in 2034? So we used a statistical Holt-Winters method to forecast demand at a lower tier municipality level through to 2034. We are projecting 30 P3 or code 3 and code 4 incidents per day in 2034. And this is an increase of 4.2% per year across the county on average, with different increases in different areas, the highest being in ACW in terms of actual proportional increase. That 4.2% across the county is quite similar to the historical rate that we've seen from 2019 through to 2024, which was 4.7%. And it's also quite similar to the projection that we undertook in the 2019 review, which was for 4.4%. So both historically and the previous projection and this new projection coming up with similar, slightly different, but similar numbers. We also compared that to the population figures in the Watson and Associates Economists report to see where we're seeing changes in population. Do those areas line up with where we're seeing increases in demand through to 2034 as well? And they generally do. So generally we see in the areas with larger proportional increases in population, we see larger proportional increases in demand as well. Total population increase isn't the only factor that drives paramedic service demand. There are other demographic factors, aging populations, and other reasons why people may call for paramedic service assistance or call 911 more frequently than they might have done 5 years ago. But it gives us a good metric to compare against. We also, though I won't cover it in detail in the presentation today, we also tested out a lower and higher demand projection as well for the future to make sure that if we can monitor demand for the next 10 years, if things are looking higher or lower than this 4.2% across the county, we're then aware of what needs to change to make sure we keep on track with those demand increases. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we do when we set up our simulation and optimization models, which are effectively computer replicas of the paramedic service, a really complicated system taking into account all the different things that happen from a call being generated all the way through to mobilizing, responding, spending time on scene with the patient, transporting to hospital, and then becoming clear, and all of that potentially happening at the same time, as well as impacting upon things like standby moves for coverage across the county. First thing we do in our model, once we've set that up, is we tend to load in those demand increases through to 2034 and make no other changes. So no additional resources. And it's not a recommendation for us to say, let's just see demand increase and not change anything in the next 10 years, but it's a useful baseline to see, okay, if nothing were to change, what actually happens. We just focused on the 90th percentile here, which is so 90% of patients receiving a response within this time. That's around 17 minutes in the 2024 base position. And if demand increased as projected at that 4.2% per year, that would increase by about a minute in the county, across the county on average in 2034. So we'd be at about 18 minutes now for 90% of responses. And it would differ by area as well. Howick has the longest 90th percentile at the moment, over 21 minutes, and that would actually have the largest increase through to 2034 as well, if no additional resources were introduced. Next slide, please. Before we started to think about how many more staff, how many more vehicles might we need to make in the right place to respond to those patients that are within the county that we need to respond to. So we used our optimization model to assess, based on where all the code 4 incidents occur and where the population is, where are the optimal locations for the same number of bases and posts that we have currently across the county. And really, that's again not a recommendation as such. We're not saying we can pick up all of the stations and immediately put them down in their optimal location, but it gives us an idea of where are we close to the optimal location, and that's a good place to continue with, and where might there be some differences? Really similarly to the 2019 review, overall, we're finding that stations are generally quite well located compared to where the demand is. Probably the largest exception and the recommendation really is to again move Tuckersmith to Seaforth, and hopefully you can see that highlighted on the map on the right hand side. The green location of Tuckersmith is the current location, and that blue diamond further southeast is the recommended optimal location for a site in Seaforth. You might just be able to pick out in the background, we can see kind of black circles. These are representing demand locations, and the larger the circle, the greater the demand. We can see there aren't really that many incidents occurring near the Tuckersmith base, but there are in Seaforth, so it's relatively clear to see why the model is suggesting that we move a site down to Seaforth. We then tested it out to say, okay, well, you know, it might be the optimal location, but is it worth doing? Is it going to give us some performance benefits that are material? It is still recommended, given it would actually improve performance within the Huron East municipality by just under 10% for Code 4 non-transfer performance within 8 minutes. So quite a sizable improvement. It would actually represent just under a 1% improvement in performance across the county overall, even without any additional resources anywhere else, just moving that location from Tuckersmith to Seaforth. Probably the other location that stands out as well is around ACW, where we've got the post at the moment towards the north of ACW. The optimization model suggesting, as it did with the last review, a site nearer to the Bluffs, which is a relatively sizable development just north of Goderich as well. Next slide, please. So building on top of that, so taking that recommendation for moving Tuckersmith to Seaforth, because it's quite clearly a key performance improvement and the largest improvement of moving any of those existing stations to their optimal location. We then wanted to maintain 2024 or current performance by lower tier municipality through to 2034. So we needed to add vehicles in to get the best bang for our buck and be the most efficient way to maintain that response performance in the future. So we've ended up modeling around a 33% increase in ambulance hours, which is 392 additional ambulance hours per week, and around 19 full-time staff with some part-time staff requirement on top of that as well. That would include that relocation of Tuckersmith to Seaforth, adding a Clinton day shift, a Bayfield night shift, an Exeter day shift and night shift, and then a Wingham night shift as well. And I'll come on to the ordering of those in the recommendation section. What we can see, if we focus just on the bottom right-hand table, is we're actually seeing performance improvements in virtually all of the municipalities. There are a couple, Goderich and South Huron, where a couple of the measures are slightly below current performance, but some of the other measures are improved. So given we need to deal with whole shifts and whole numbers of staff, we've not added any more to go even further. But overall, we actually see a 4.1% improvement in the performance within 8 minutes across Huron County. Huron East and Bluewater really some of the larger improvements, Huron East in particular with that station relocation. Also, that 33% increase is to mitigate what is a 50% increase in demand that we're projecting in the next 10 years. Next slide, please. So then we took that position a little bit further forward and looked, as we did with the last review, so not only just maintaining performance, but what if the ask was to improve performance through to achieving 70% of responses within 12 minutes for Code 4s in each lower tier municipality. So kind of a performance floor, no municipality below 70% in 12 minutes. Some municipalities are already achieving that, but we did need to make a number of changes in a few areas. The largest challenge is in Howick, where there is no current station location. So we would need to add a station in or just north of Roxeter and add 24-hour vehicle coverage at that station to be able to get to 70% of the population within 12 minutes or greater. We added a standby post as well at the Bluffs north of Goderich, again highlighted by that map I showed a couple of slides ago. we moved the Goderich night shift to there and then added another shift to be posted from Goderich to the Bluffs. That's an additional 3 12-hour shifts effectively, and an additional station that we would need, and an additional post that we would need to improve performance through to that 70% in 12 minutes across each municipality. Next slide, please. So I'll just go through now some of the recommendations for the next 10 years. Because clearly we've talked about where we were, where we're going to be in 10 years, but we need to kind of step through what's the priority order of some of the changes we're suggesting. Next slide, please. So assuming that the desired performance scenario is to maintain 2024 or current performance through to 2034, these are the kind of short-term, medium-term and long-term actions we need to take in the order that helps us maintain performance in each municipality as much as possible. Really, the number one recommendation to hopefully be achieved, and it obviously was on that list back in 2020 as well, is to hopefully within the short term, within the next few years, relocate Tuckersmith to Seaforth, or at least definitely identify lands to be able to do so and make that change. We then also look to add a night shift in Bayfield and realign the existing shift rather than a late shift to be daytime hours to make 24/7 coverage. In the medium term, we would add Clinton day shift and the Wingham night shift. And then the longer term, sort of 2031 to 34, we would add a Exeter day shift and an Exeter night shift as well. Then there were also a couple of specific things we looked at around demand and station relocations also. So we collected county development data with residential developments that are kind of in train for the next 10 years or so, and built those into the simulation model to test out, are there any material changes? So if those developments continue as planned, and some of them are not at draft approved stage at this point, so we're kind of assuming they all get built out by that time. If we were to assume that, does it introduce anything that means we need to change the plan potentially? Really, the most significant changes around there's a site development to the south of Goderich that may have between 500 and 1,200 units, depending on the exact scale, based on the information we have, which could be up to 2,500 people if it's at that upper end of the scale, and depending on the number of persons in each unit. That would drive a relatively significant amount of demand in Goderich, where current population's around 7,000 to 8,000 people. So it'd be quite a large increase over the next 10 years or so, and I think actually larger than the increase assumed in the Watson and Associates report for Goderich municipality as a total. So when we built that into the simulation model, it's also slightly further, it's right on the boundary of a kind of 8-minute response time from the current station. So clearly now with more demand in that area that we're not really able to get to in 8 minutes, that would degrade our response performance in Goderich municipality. And that's something to really monitor in the future to see how is that development progressing, and whether there should be an assessment of moving potentially the Goderich station further south to be able to better reach that demand in particular. We also looked at that specific question right at the start of the presentation around the potential Grand Bend station move for Lambton EMS, which is moving further southwest and would have an impact on that kind of south or southwest of South Huron municipality response time. There would need to be some level of mitigation applied in that area, given that the station is effectively moving further southwest and not providing as quick a response into Huron County there, with drive times to that area, I think around 25 minutes from Exeter or Zurich stations. So two things really there to monitor really throughout the process as well. And next slide, please. So if we are to follow those recommendations, what we'd actually be able to see, just showing on the graph here, is in red, we're showing 8-minute response performance. In blue, we're showing 12-minute response performance, and in yellow, 17-minute response performance. The dotted lines show the do nothing position. So if we don't introduce any additional resources and don't move Tuckersmith to Seaforth, what could performance do in the next 10 years? And clearly performance fall, given demand is increasing. The more solid lines show actually if we implement those recommendations, what performance could look like, and we see improvements in all three of those measures across the county towards that kind of 60, nearer to 60% in performance in 2034 in 8 minutes across the county. Next slide, please. That really just covers a relatively brief overview of our work that we've undertaken, and I appreciate obviously any questions now. Hopefully we can answer.
So thank you, Andrew. Thank you for that in-depth presentation, and I'm going to go to council if there's any comments or questions. Past Warden McClellan.
I don't really have any questions. I certainly do want to comment that I do appreciate the in-depth information that has been presented here. It certainly gives me a lot more confidence in making a decision going forward. I think it was 20 years ago when we decided to put the stations where they are, and unfortunately, what council received at that time, I think Councillor Klopp was here at the time, was we got a bunch of circles on a map, and we said if we space them out evenly, that was going to be the most efficient thing. We didn't have this kind of analysis of what went through. It certainly does make sense what I'm seeing. I also like the fact that we're not talking about doing everything all at once. It's a stepped approach, because 20 years ago, we'd have never considered moving a station close to where the bluffs are right now because there was no development or talk of development at that time. And the point made about something happening south of Goderich on 21, you never know. A decade from now, we may say that's an appropriate spot to move something closer, or if it doesn't go ahead the way we think it will, we may not do something at all. So I really do like this stepped approach, and I'm pretty confident with the information we're receiving here. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Past Warden Ginn.
Yeah, I have a few actually. First off, I think great presentation, very professional. Hospital emergency room closures. Clinton's been closed for 4 years. Wingham closes from time to time, as does Seaforth. Does that have any effect? Can you enlighten us on what that actually does to our service levels?
Andrew?
Thank you. Through you, Warden. Yes, good question. So the Clinton Public Hospital overnight closure was something we did specifically look at as part of the review. So it does, there is an impact to service levels and to performance. Clearly, there's greater runtime to other hospitals, depending on which one is nearest. But there are relatively few patients that occur overnight that would be taken to hospital. So on that occasion, when that is occurring and you would need to go to a different hospital, that is obviously an impact on the drive time. But in the scheme of, or in the kind of whole system and looking at everything, resource availability is relatively higher at night, in particular when those closures are happening or tend to happen, and that planned closure is definitely happening. So it does tend to have a relatively small impact, not anything that would require an additional resource for that exact occasion, if that makes sense. But it would, and it has had impacts on performance. So in our model, we kind of tested reopening the public hospital, Clinton Public Hospital, overnight to assess what's the impact. There is a small impact, but definitely, it's clearly not zero. To that patient, obviously, there may be a greater impact of changing their location effectively and moving them somewhere further away than they may be expected. So, yes, definitely something to monitor, and it might depend on the scale in future of some of those closures, whether they are some of the larger hospitals in particular.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's one bit of information I find a little troubling, and you cite the Watson report. When the Watson report came to county councillor, we had 3 options as to whether to take the low, the medium, or the high. And it's actually a decision from county council that we took the medium curve. And with all due respect to my colleagues, I don't think we're really experts in population expansion. But when you looked at the Watson report, did you just look at the median curve, or did you have a more in-depth look at the high and the low end of that curve projection?
Okay, Andrew?
Sure, thank you. And through you, Warden. Yeah, again, good question. So we looked at, we focused on the median projection, but we did look at the low and high from that report as well. I would say, though, that as well, in all the reviews that we undertake where we're looking at future demand for paramedic or EMS services, not just in Ontario, but across the work we do across the world, we can't just solely look at the population changes necessarily. So there's kind of total population change, which, you know, maybe that's at the low end, medium end, high end in reality. There's also a lot of other drivers, some of which are quantifiable, some of which are really hard to quantify. So obviously population aging, as people age, they tend to require greater paramedic service assistance in future than they might have done when they were younger. Generally in the kind of Western world, we're seeing a generally aging population, but it does differ across different areas in Ontario and in some of the work we do. There's also, though, there tends to be if you looked back at an average, let's say 75-year-old 5 years ago, they would request assistance. You know, maybe they'd have a 50% chance that they would need paramedic service assistance in a year. That tends to, across the work we do, slowly increase year on year, kind of per person. So even putting population to one side, that tends to also increase as well, which is really hard to quantify. You know, it's kind of a health and demographic and social factors that contribute to that person maybe requiring a little bit more assistance than they would have done, or the equivalent person would have done a few years ago as well. So whilst we obviously did look at that Watson and Associates report and looked at the variety of numbers included within that, along with the county development information, it's important we didn't kind of just rely on those figures, but also use the wealth of historical demand information we had from the paramedic service as well. And that's why we also tested out in the full report, there's the kind of lower demand projection and higher demand projection to test out, okay, if things grow at a lower rate or higher rate, are we needing to change things very quickly? You know, where do we tip over to needing another 12-hour shift, for example, those kind of things. So hopefully we've covered that in some of the modeling we've done.
Past Warden again?
Yeah, one more, and maybe this might go to Jeff, but I believe Bruce County was looking at possibly putting a station in, if my memory is correct, either in Ripley or in Lucknow. Have they made that decision yet? Because if it goes to Lucknow, it could, I guess, help us out a little bit as far as service. Jeff, I don't know if you want to handle it or to Andrew.
Sure, through you, Mr. Warden. Yes, I can tell you that that is their plan. I don't believe that they have any projections for when a permanent station may be occurring there. They do deploy a resource there when available through the day right now. So if you recall, we also brought back the cross-border billing agreement earlier this year, in which one of the reasons that we went with a shorter term on that cross-border billing agreement was to allow Bruce County to make the changes that they may be making in the future, and then look at what the call volume between the two services look like. So they're not there yet, and actually Andrew did do their review as well, so Andrew's familiar with that same question, but I don't believe that there's a permanent base or location that's been chosen, but they are deploying a resource when available.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Finch.
Yeah, thank you. And through the warden to Andrew, and the same along with the same vein as past warden Ginn was talking about. I'm just wondering about our long-term care projects that are now in that are on the go in Exeter, and of course the one in Goderich, and the affordable housing projects that are in Exeter, and of course the Gibbon Street project. Is there a huge impact with those projects to the service levels?
Andrew?
Thank you, and through you, Warden. Yeah, great question. So it's something we looked at within the review, and it's something we can definitely see particularly in the information we have historically. You know, we get pretty accurate location information, coordinate information for all the calls that occur, and we can see, you know, where those locations are and where they've been occurring historically. So we've definitely looked at that as an impact for the future, particularly when we've built in that development information for the future to look at, you know, specific developments. I think that aside from long-term care, that South Goderich development is the most substantial, but there are long-term care long-term care home information with a number of beds expected, including in the development information that we've been provided. I think sometimes it can really depend on the location of those specifically, because if they are, for example, again, stepping aside from long-term care, but same principle applies, that development that's further south in Goderich, that's kind of outside an 8-minute drive time, really has an impact. If it's somewhere relatively close to a station, it will increase workload, and it may have small impacts on performance because we're slightly less available. But we tend to find that in a more kind of rural setting, it tends to be more of a coverage issue rather than a busyness and workload issue. So there will be more calls, but tends to not specifically at those locations have a huge impact. There will clearly be an impact because there are more calls occurring, and we've looked at that in our work. But it really depends on a specific level as to those locations generally as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Klopp.
Thank you. Touching on the hospital closures, if I heard right, you said that there was, you looked at that, but you didn't think there was a big difference in call time. Did I hear that right? To my question to
Andrew.
Thank you. And through you, Warden. Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yes, that's right. So we looked at that. We tested that out in our modelling software to see what the impact was, and there wasn't a huge impact across the board, and particularly in Central Huron for that Clinton Public Hospital example. There wasn't a huge impact in performance. There is an impact, but not a huge one.
Thank you. I don't know if it's in your purview or whatever, but we do have this issue of keeping our local hospitals open, and we are blessed with 5. And my humble experience out in the country or in a village or whatever, I think it does have an effect. And I think we need to have that information as much as we can fettered out to have the argument about our hospitals staying open as it relates to this cost, which the province does share 50-50. So I appreciate how it was done, but I do think that we should ask for some of that information to help with some other arguments. And just if I may, it's been talked about the 2000 when the county was downloaded the ambulance service. That was one of the reasons I ran for council at the time. Was honored to be on the committee. I got to say that there was a lot of information there like this. I credit Councillor Steffler, who raised the flag that I don't know if the model we're going to use is right. There was great discussion. A few of us did vote no. I take no pleasure in that because that estimated $4 million at that time turned out that it wasn't quite right. I've heard this a number of times for years here, but I want to be clear. There was a lot of information just like this. We make choices. We were more right, but I credit Councillor Steffler for leading that charge. However, at the end of the day, it is what it is. And as we go forward, we're still going to make decisions that they're never going to be perfect. But just as respect for the councillors that did take a lot of heat, I want to say, there's a lot of information that was there, but let's keep driving on and do the best we can. But I think some of these nuggets of hospitals, I think, do affect it. Right in Clinton, of course, as we look at the call numbers, for example, sir, it's green around Clinton, but as you get out further, and if all of a sudden all those Clinton calls are having to go to Goderich or go to Exeter or go to even Seaforth, it's going to have an effect. And I think we do need to have that information. I leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And I believe staff would take that into consideration when they give us future reports. So, any other comments? Seeing none, then I would ask that we would receive this report. Councillor Heffer, past Warden Ginn would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us and giving us a very detailed report.
Thank you very much, everyone.
And we're now moving on to the purchase of 2 ambulances, and Jeff Horseman is here for questions that we would have on this report. Councillor Klopp?
Yes, our policy is what it is, but did we not have some discussion, previous councils to look at other ways of reducing the cost, transferring the boxes onto new chassis, et cetera, et cetera? Could you just remind me that we're still looking at that, or was that all thrown out?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes, sir, Mr. Warden. Yes, it's a program that has been looked at several times. Right now, the lead time to do that is the same as purchasing a new vehicle. Unfortunately, the cost is slightly less, but not a significant cost difference right now. I think probably what the good news coming forward for council to note is that we're being told by the ministry, by the province, that there'll be a few new vendors on the market certified in Ontario in the near future, possibly as early as next year, which will bring back that competition into purchase of vehicles, and we may have other options in the future.
Thank you for that, Jeff. Bass Warden McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to Jeff. Jeff, in the past, we've had issues when we've had multiple vendors in different things to do with the ambulance service, where things weren't competitive, or we couldn't. We wanted them to be consistent across the entire service. Do you have any information that if these new manufacturers are going to come on board, that everything will be transferable from one to the other as far as equipment that we use inside or the vehicles themselves? Any information on that going forward?
Jeff?
Through you, Mr. Warden. So I think the answer is yes and no. It's not that cut and dried yet. I can tell you that, you know, something like the chassis, GM versus Ford are the 2 vendors that are on the market currently. That's probably neither here nor there when it comes to driving the vehicle for the paramedics. When it comes to the box and the equipment, if we are buying a vehicle that is a like vehicle, then the box is generally laid out very similar to each other, and it won't be an issue with that. All vendors that come onto the Ontario market have to be certified in the retention system, so we can still buy the normal retention system that we're buying, which right now is the Striker power load, power cod, and power load system. So any vendor that's being certified to provide an ambulance in the future in Ontario will have to be certified based on the fact that they will be able to utilize and certify that particular load system in the vehicle. So when it comes to that type of equipment, yeah, it's not going to make a difference which vendor it is. So as long as we continue to buy Type 3 vehicles, the back of the vehicle will be generally laid out the same for the paramedics.
Thank you, Jeff. That answers questions. So any further questions? Go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Warden. So if there's going to be more vendors next year, is there any way this could be put off until next year and then maybe go through the competitive process?
Jeff?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. My own recommendation would be no. The lead time on a vehicle right now is 18 months to 24 months. So although we're purchasing this vehicle currently right now, or we're asking to purchase this vehicle right now, we are not going to see this vehicle until late in 2026, late or middle of 2026, or late in 2025. The new vendors on the market are not yet certified, so we don't know when that certification is going to come. It may not come in time for a purchase of next year. Just in context, the vehicles that we purchased in 2024 have not been received yet. So we will be receiving those vehicles sometime this coming year.
Thank you, Jeff. Any others? Then I'd be looking for a motion to receive the report and that we approve the purchase of the 2 ambulances. And that, Didn't even get it moved and seconded, and everybody's eager to vote. So, Councillor Finch would make the motion. Everybody was keen. Past Warden McClellan, those in favor? And now that is carried. And it's almost 10:30. I'm going to suggest a 5-minute comfort break, and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. And we're at Public Works in our agenda, and we have a tender for 3 tandem plow trucks. And I believe Imran is here to receive questions if we have questions regarding this tender. Motion made by Councillor Klopp. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Becker? Those in favor? And that is carried. And Economic Development. Vicky, welcome. And we have some new board members to be appointed for the ECDEV board. And go ahead. Yeah, just here for questions. So is there any questions from council on these recommendations? Then I'd be looking for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Noel, past Warden McNeil would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to administration and policies, we have Aaron Samuel with us. And Aaron, you're going to be here for any questions that would come up regarding our brand management policy. So is there any questions for Aaron on this report? Seeing none, then I'd be looking for someone to receive the report and to approve. Councillor Harding, Councillor McClellan would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. And our treasurer, Mike Bloomhagen, is here for questions on the additional capital and operating projects deferral for 2025. If there's any questions for Michael on these few items that are added in here. Seeing none, I would look for someone to make the motion to receive. Councillor Heffer, seconded by Councillor Ginn. Past Warden Ginn, those in favor? That is carried. Correspondence. Is there any items there that anybody wants to speak to? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Warden. I would like to support 14.3 from the City of Guelph, the resolution to enable municipalities to charge user fees and municipal property for gas utilities.
Councillor Finch would second that. Is there any other discussion? Those in favor? That is carried. Anything else on that list? Then I'd be looking for a motion to receive correspondence that was not specifically dealt with for information purposes. Councillor Finch, seconded by Councillor Heffer. Those in favor? That is carried. So we have some unfinished business, and this is a memorandum of understanding with the North Huron Trail Groomers. And I believe Sandra Weber is here to answer any questions regarding that report. If there's no questions, then I'd be looking for someone to make a motion. Councillor Dietrich, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Those in favor? And that is carried. We're at bylaws in our agenda and or notice of motion. Is there any notice of motion that anybody would like to address at this time? And of course, I'd suggest you reach out to staff ahead of a meeting to do that and be prepared for it. So moving on to bylaws, we have 7 bylaws to be given first, second, and third reading. Is there someone to move the bylaws? Councillor Klopp and Councillor Finch would second that. Those in favor? That is carried. And we are now looking for a motion to go into a closed public session. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor McClellan, seconded by Councillor Vanstone. Those in favor? That is carried. And for those of you leaving the meeting at this time, a Merry Christmas to all. And is there any way of getting the camera onto Jason just for a moment? It just Christmas must be fantastic in your house, Jason. And Don't know if it comes with batteries or a volume switch. Either way, it's impressive.
Apparently no
So-
volume switch.
Okay, good. Thank you, everyone. And our clerk, Susan, will let us know when we're ready for closed session. Okay, we're looking for a motion to come out of closed session. Councillor Dietrich, Councillor Ellen McClellan, those in favor, and that is carried. And I'm going to go to our CAO work for a rise and report from closed.
You're muted. CAO work.
Of course I am. I just lost my agenda. The purpose of going into closed session today was for council to receive an update from the solicitor and staff on the South Huron Roundabout project.
All right, thank you for that. And now we're looking for a motion. Just hold back. So we are now returned from our closed session and we have a motion to consider, and that is to direct staff to proceed with the direction given during our closed session. Councillor Harding would move that. Councillor Finch would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. The upcoming meetings are posted for what we see coming up in January. And I'll move on to our confirmatory bylaw. Who would like to confirm our actions for this morning? Councillor Finch, Councillor Basnet would second that. Those in favor? And that is carried. And who would like to wrap up the final meeting of 2024? Councillor Dietrich and Councillor Heffer. Those in favor? That is carried. Merry Christmas to one and all.
Yeah.